Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, there has been long-term debate over short-term rentals, but now the City Council has made a decision. We'll look at the debate. There was also debate in the Senate race this week. We'll discuss the latest as well as the competition on the Democratic side. We'll also look at new nonstop service to London and legal wrangling over the World Trade Center, which has also been nonstop. And while votes of no confidence are not unusual in British politics, they're seldom seen here until this week in Jefferson Parish. We'll examine the latest in the Mike Yenni saga. Having our confidence are tonight's informed sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Jeremy Alford, publisher, LaPolitics.com, Kevin Litten, reporter, NewOrleans.com, the Times-Picayune, and Stephanie Grace, columnist, the New Orleans Advocate. We go over first to Errol, and Jefferson Parish President Mike Yenni made an appearance before council this week.
You know, what's really bizarre about this story is that we're quite used to seeing politicians in trouble for some reason, but usually when the politician's in trouble, there's some segment that's backing, that's supporting the politician, that's saying this is wrong, it's a conspiracy. I mean, usually it might be party or race or something or some kind of faction, but there's no faction here that's going to want to line up in support of Yenni. Now, at the council meeting, there was a small group of people with T-shirts that said "Keep Yenni," but I don't think they represent a groundswell by any means, and there's just not going to be the support out there. And his argument is, saying, look, keep me and I'll work harder, I'll prove myself to you by working harder. That's going to be a hard thing to prove. I don't know if the public's supposed to have some monitor in the office, keeping his hours or something, or if that'll make a difference. But things got even worse this week with, here was a man who a year ago was the mayor of Kenner, in his second term, and popular mayor of Kenner, and this week the Kenner City Council voted unanimously to ask him to resign, as did the Harahan Council, as did the other city councils in Jefferson Parish, as did the Jefferson Parish Council. And then the most unusual maneuver was the Jefferson Parish Council also voted a vote of no confidence. Now, you hardly ever see a vote of no confidence in American politics. That's a parliamentary maneuver. A lot of times it's used in the political party, and depending on the country, sometimes a vote of no confidence means you're expected to resign. In this case, it's just another bit of ammunition to fire at him. But if you can imagine, here's a man only in his first few months as parish president, and already to have the city that he was elected from voting against him, and for the council to vote no confidence. And so it's really a serious rejection, but there's still no legal means to get rid of him other than the recall method.
And there was a poll that came out that the Advocate and WWL did that showed people are very willing to sign a recall petition, and that's, the law is set up to make it very difficult to get a question like that on the ballot. You need signatures of a third of registered voters, which would be about 90,000 people in Jefferson. So even if people aren't, necessarily in favor of keeping him, that's a lot of apathy to overcome. But based on this poll, 45% said they would definitely sign it. If you extrapolate that out, that gets you well over that number if they really get them in front of people.
So we've seen the city level, the parish level, and the next is the state level. House and Governmental Affairs Chairman Mike Yenni is going to call a meeting before the end of the year to look at a proposal for next session to change the recall law. I spoke to Paul Hollis, and he told me that he's the one who filed this study resolution. He filed it because of an issue in St. Tammany, but now it's very much a Jefferson issue. He's saying that he's leaning towards legislation next year that would require signatures to only be collected from roughly a third of those who actually voted. Now, you can collect a third from registered voters. They don't have to be those who actually voted. Right. But what he did is he took an average from the states that do require the signatures from among those who voted. And he said through his research nationally, he said Louisiana has the highest threshold with that 33% requirement.
And if you look at that number, about 87,000 voted for parish president for all of the candidates, and that's fewer than the 90,000 they would need. So that's a huge difference.
And so that recall petition is now underway. Do we know how it's going, how many signatures are being gathered? I mean, it's one thing for people to say, yes, I would sign it.
Yes.
Another for them to actually go to the locations where they could sign it.
We know they've been active. We know they've been at Night Out Against Crime, at the parish council meeting where Mike Yenni actually showed up. There seems to be some money behind it. There's an office. There are very politically sophisticated people working on it. So.
Bob Evans was interviewed by one of the TV stations, and he gave a figure which I don't recall, but it's in the thousands. I mean, it's not near 90,000, but he suggested some optimism that it's going to happen. There's no doubt that there's 90,000 people who, if given a chance, would gladly sign the petition. It's just getting the petition to 90,000 people. But the difference that you point out, Jeremy, I mean, it's critical, the difference between 1/3 of registered voters and 1/3 of voters who actually vote, because there's a lot of registered voters who might not even be around, who might not even be, living in town anymore, who maybe, may have been deceased, and so that figure is inflated, and yet they need to count in the actual number. On the one hand, you don't want to make the process too easy, because if you make it too easy, then some special interest group can always intimidate somebody. But on the other hand, you don't want to make it too hard either, and I guess you have to find some sort of medium on this.
Well, California is 12%.
And some people are very critical about the California system. That the California is an example of it being too easy. That it can be government by whim. And there you can have, if you have a special interest group that's powerful enough, I mean, they can change law just by that.
But this recall drive is going to be based on the current legislation.
Sure, right.
Okay. And of course, we want to, repeat the fact that President Yenni said that he can do the job and he wants to stay, and he's asking forgiveness. Give him a chance to do the job.
He has not been charged with anything.
No, he has not been charged with anything. Okay, we'll see how that continues to move along. Let's move over now to Kevin and some more council action, this time in New Orleans, over a really hotly contested topic, and that is short-term rentals. And council made some decision, although everybody's not quite exactly sure what, but some decision has been reached.
Yeah, I mean, we've really been all over the place on this issue, and the place where we ended up at council yesterday was sort of brand new. Many pieces of it were brand new to people. People didn't get to see the proposal before it came out. I reported it was 120 days. Next, when we get to council, it's 90 days. That's the 90-day limit on the whole house rental. I think the other thing that's really interesting about this debate is it's just such a visceral issue for New Orleans. I mean, you get elements of culture, you get the neighborhoods brought into it. There's affordability issues that get brought up in this debate. So there was a lot of disappointment, I think, among people that were from your neighborhood associations, from people who support affordable housing, to see these whole house rentals still be allowed. There's limits, there's the 90-day limit, but there's still a fear that investors would still be able to come in, scoop up homes at prices that your normal residents would not be able to pay, and that those would then be dark during the week when the renters aren't there.
Of course, we're talking about short-term rentals by companies like Airbnb, and there's some others. And so a deal was struck by the administration, council members involved too, and these companies, and that's the policy that council looked at yesterday. And as you said, that was distributed to everybody really minutes before the council meeting started, so people really didn't have a time to digest it much. So for whole home rentals, so one does not have to have a homestead exemption. You don't have to live in there.
That's right. There was a proposal that Councilwoman Susan Guidry tried to get passed. It failed by one vote that would have required a homestead exemption. You actually have to live in the house if you want to rent it out. But with that having failed, now we're back to the 90-day limit. So I think some of the people that are going to buy it are probably going to be dissuaded from buying a house because they're not going to be able to get the maximum number of rentals out of it, but you're still going to have people in there that are going to do it.
Homestead exemption required for like a half house rental or a room. You have to live there.
You do have to live there if you're renting out a room or if you own a double and you're renting out half the double.
Now, if we understand that the whole 90-day limit, to get that, they're going to need the cooperation from the industry, and the industry bought into this particular plan. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think in some ways, from a nationwide perspective, this is going to get a lot of attention because this is one of the first cities that was able to get cooperation from the online rental platforms. They really don't like sharing data because the data helps with enforcement. You don't know when you look on an Airbnb map exactly where a rental is. So if you've got, for instance, Paris bans all whole home rentals. That's never enforced in Paris because they can't figure out where they are. So the companies that do the short-term rentals were really key in this debate. They were basically saying, look, if we don't get certain things passed in these regulations, we're not going to help you with enforcement.
And having that data and enforcement is important for tax collection, and that's the big argument by the city is that, this money that can come into the coffers, also the fact that it's been going on and it hasn't been enforced.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the city also needs to pay for enforcement. They think it's going to cost about $850,000 annually to have a bureau that would both do tax collection and run a hotline. You'd be able to call in if you've got a problem rental in your neighborhood and be able to keep track of what they call the bad actors, the people that are throwing big parties and disrupting neighborhoods.
And even suggesting turning off power if you keep having these people who are just offending in that kind of way. So ordinance still has to be drawn up to actually codify it, and then enforcement has to be determined too, how that it will be enforced. After yesterday's meeting, was there anybody happy that left from yesterday's meeting, would you say?
I would say that the people, the historic preservationists and the folks in the French Quarter did leave happy, because one thing we didn't talk about is there is a full ban, almost a full ban on the French Quarter. The only place that whole home rentals will be allowed in the French Quarter are along the entertainment section of Bourbon Street, because they want to get some of those upper levels activated. But that was, I think that was a big win for French Quarter folks. We'll see how well they can enforce it, because I think that was a loss for Airbnb. I think there's a lot of money to be made on short-term rentals that are actually in the quarter.
Okay, we'll see how this all turns out. Thanks a lot, Kevin.
Sure.
Let's talk about Senate politics now, Senate race. And there was a debate among five of the 24 candidates, yes, this week, televised debate. How did that go?
Well, we're down to 23, we should
Okay,
say.
that's right.
One dropped out,
Right.
Abhay Patel, who was polling at 0%, so he's endorsing Charles Bustani. There was a debate.
Well, he's still on the ballot.
He's on the ballot,
yeah.
yes, but they will not, his votes will not be counted.
Okay.
And he endorsed, he's sending his supporters to Charles Bustani. They're both kind of business conservatives. Charles Bustani is one of 3 main Republicans who participated along with 2 Democrats. It was sponsored by Louisiana Public Broadcasting and Cable. They do a debate every year. This was really late. I mean, we're 3 weeks out from the election. This was really the first chance for television audiences to see the leading candidates. It was an interesting debate. There were some policy discussions. There was some good political back and forth. There were good questions by a panel of journalists, including our friend Jeremy.
Yes, that's right.
One thing you definitely saw is that this is still, there are 2 lead Democrats, 3 lead Republicans, and there still is kind of a primary within a primary dynamic. You saw this especially on the Republican side in the debate. You've seen it a lot in the Democratic side in campaigning, but here you have John Kennedy, the state treasurer, Charles Bustani and John Fleming, 2 members of Congress. They were really going at each other, and they were really, actually, the other 2 were really going at Kennedy to the point where he said, that just showed that he was winning, basically, kind of with a big smile. But Fleming, they each have their niche they're trying to create, and Bustani is, if you talk to him, he'll say he's the guy that can get things done. I'm a conservative, but I'll work across the aisle, and I have a record of passing legislation. If you listen to Fleming, he's the guy who came out of the Tea Party movement. He'll say, he said, trusted conservative several times. That was clearly his line. Kennedy is the bomb thrower. Kennedy is the guy who says, Congress is a mess, Republicans, Democrats, look what I did in Baton Rouge, send me up to fix it.
So out of this debate, are we seeing any sort of dominant personality coming out of this?
We're really not, and I think that's one of the things that is, I think it's frustrating to candidates. I've spoken to several of them, and they're kind of wondering why they're not getting a lot of attention from voters. I think part of it is the presidential race, of course, but part of it is that there is no dominant character. There's no Mary Landrieu. There's no David Vitter. These are both people, if you look at the last 2 Senate races, which actually did not coincide with presidential, so that helped. You had big stories. You had, would Mary Landrieu survive in a Republican state? You had, would David Vitter, if you go back to 2010, would David Vitter survive the prostitution scandal? And you also had a real question of whether the seat was going to go Democrat-Republican, which is really important in these Senate races. So you would have interest from the outside media. Here, if you look at the races, people out there in the country are following, it's Pennsylvania, it's the swing states, it's New Hampshire. If you look at what the New York Times said, I think they said as of this morning, Louisiana had a 94 and 96% chance of going, I think it was 94 Republicans. So there's not a lot of suspense there. And these last 2 debates, in addition to having these kind of big figures, they really stood in as referenda for national politics. In both cases, the Republicans really tried to put President Obama on the ballot, really link the Democrat, to the unpopular in Louisiana president. We're seeing some of that here. John Kennedy's Super PAC actually has an ad that's targeting the two congressmen, and there's one image where he puts their picture up with Barack Obama. So clearly he's trying to go for the same thing.
Okay, so we're seeing now sort of the tone of the campaign is starting to develop more and more, and we're also seeing polls, and polls are having an impact on future debates. Why don't you talk to us
I think the
about
tone
that?
has changed. This is my favorite time of year because this is right. We got 2.5 weeks left, and it's kind of like the silly season. And look, you either get weird or go home right now. And we are seeing some weird stuff. John Kennedy has an ad up that stars a goat that he issues a death warrant for, and Congressman Bustani has issued a statement about said goat. We've seen Troy Hebert, a former legislator and ATC commissioner, has a 25-minute video on YouTube where he portrays the entire field, including Carolyn Fayard, wearing makeup and a wig. We got Rob Maness, who's saying that people are trying to get him to drop out, when again, I think a lot of us missed this, but on January 1st, the law changed. And if you weren't out of the race by July 29th, your name is going to be on the ballot. And as far as I know, you're still in the race. And so things are getting a little funny. They're getting a little weird, but we're starting to see some trends. On the Democratic side, I think it's clear that Foster Campbell is starting to pull away. It's showing up in the trends. I think he's benefited from support from Governor John Bel Edwards, and also his decision to go up on TV while Carolyn Fayard stayed on black radio may have been a guidepost in this race. But mostly he has a traditional Democratic base of support with the teachers unions and labor. But I'm not one to count out Carolyn Fayard yet. I think a lot of things have to happen and come together for her to close strong, but she's still capable of doing it. On the Republican side, you got John Kennedy, who is just sitting there like a political piñata full of votes. Everybody's got a stick. Between now and November 8th, he's going to get hit between 3 and 3 million times. Those votes are going to drop off. I think he's slowly going to fall. And meanwhile, you've got Charles Bustani and Fleming, who I think are going to go back and forth a little. So the question is, over the next 2.5 weeks, are they going to meet somewhere in the middle before Election Day? So it's still a fascinating race. Anything could happen, and I think it's going to get particularly nasty here in the next couple of weeks.
First, let me congratulate you on the piñata metaphor. That was really nice. Okay. The other thing, this week we're starting to see newspaper endorsements kick in. We saw the Times-Picayune endorsed Bustani, and I think was it the Lafayette Advertiser
paper did too.
Or another one.
Which
and in
is
a race like
something.
this, when, as you say, no one is a clear favorite, when there's so many candidates, those endorsements can possibly mean a lot more. I mean, they could make the difference between getting into a runoff or not.
Bustani really, I think, appeals to the type of person who might be swayed by a newspaper endorsement. So that's probably a nice thing for him. I don't know how powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it's, endorsements, they're usually kind of hit or miss. I don't think we've had any, I think probably Governor John Bel Edwards is.
Best when people don't know who to vote for, when they have no idea. When there's
Tell me the difference between these three Republicans.
When there's a bunch of faceless people, and to people in New Orleans, a lot of these are faceless people. And especially if they endorse someone from another part in the state, it probably doesn't mean as much in Lafayette that the Advertiser endorsed Bustani, but in New Orleans, that could be a big deal. Yeah. It was like when the Picayune endorsed Buddy Romer for governor. That started his campaign moving. So.
Although there, I think, they were kind of catching a wave. Romer was already on the move, and they kind of helped accelerate
last
that.
year the Picayune endorsed Vitter, I believe. And then, what's the track record?
There was Randy Ewing, remember that?
Ewing.
But there was Ray Nagin. It comes and goes.
Okay, well,
it happens or doesn't.
Let's get back to this one right now. In the next debate, in this past debate, we had 5 candidates. Next one, we're going to have 6.
Dun, dun, dun. So they set a threshold for the Raycom debate of 5% to get in this debate. And lo and behold, David Duke ends up with 5.1%. So he is going to be on stage with the chosen 5. And at Dillard University. And he told The Advocate overnight in an interview that he's concerned about his safety, that they take Black Lives Matter very seriously. And so we've already seen Foster Campbell. Stephanie and I were looking at that before we went on the air, that he issued a press release saying he has concerns about it. And I'm interested to see what the body language and the chemistry is going to be like in that room, because we've seen earlier reports of candidates don't want to end up in a photo with him or standing by him or shaking his hand. And It's live TV. You know, anything
That's
can
probably
happen.
going to bring national media too.
Well, it's
national media
interesting. I
attention.
Yes,
said this
yeah.
on Twitter, and I immediately got retweeted by a couple of the national political reporters. So I think, yes, I
Mm-hmm.
think it hits that sweet spot where people, and of course, Duke is trying to ride Donald Trump's coattails. So
Mm-hmm.
he had a robocall that came out right at the time of the debate that basically said, I used to be the most hated man in America, and now Donald Trump is, so vote for both of us. So, and
so-
Trump has renounced him.
So that debate is Raycom, as we said, will be on Fox 8 here, WVUE, and then on other stations around the state.
WFD,
Yeah.
Should be a
Right,
ratings
yeah.
bonanza.
Yes,
I would
November
think.
2nd is the
November
date.
2nd, okay. Okay, all righty. Thanks a lot, guys. Let's go back over to Kevin right now. And legal wrangling, as Errol wrote, has been nonstop on the World Trade Center. We do have a deal, the city does, with a certain company to turn into Four Seasons, but that's been challenged. And that has changed.
That's
Talk
right.
to
So
us
the
about that.
deal has been in place for about 18 months now, and I think everybody thought everything went really well. We were going to have a Four Seasons delivered by maybe 2018. Great spot right there on the waterfront.
Tricentennial, part of
Right,
the whole
Tricentennial
city.
year, yeah.
So now we're well behind in trying to get that started because this lawsuit has been filed, and it's really kind of a strange lawsuit in the sense that it's the people that have been behind it were not really behind some of the proposals to begin with. A guy swoops in and buys one of the companies that bid, then he claims that the bidding was somehow, something was done wrong there. Now, that's what they were trying to determine. The lawsuit's already been dismissed once. It comes back. Then the developer that had bought that company and was challenging it, he resigns last week. He's not part of that company. And then when we get into court this week, there is someone that nobody has ever heard of, and in the a twist as only in New Orleans could be, the guy whose last name who'd resigned is also in the new guy's name, except he's supposed to be some Jordanian investor. So the judge is just sitting there, can barely keep track of what's going on in this hearing. And so the next hearing we're going to have is trying to determine who exactly this guy is that has taken over this lawsuit now and wants to take it to trial, which would happen the week of Thanksgiving.
And the judge has told this new company to come up with documentation and have it in her hands by this Monday, pretty short order.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty amazing. All you have to show that this person owns a company is an email. He sends you an email and says, I took over the company. There's no stock documents. There's nothing. So they need to come in and prove that. I think that's what the developer who actually has the deal with the city is hoping, that at this next hearing they can challenge who this guy is, and the judge could at that point say, look, this isn't even going to be able to go to trial because there's no legal vehicle to be able to take this lawsuit forward.
And meanwhile, city officials and developers are furious because this has been regarded as one of the top pieces of property in the state. Yeah. And you just have this maneuvering that's just been delayed, and it's really been unfair to downtown and unfair to the city.
So it's going to push back that 2018 opening of Four Seasons?
Yeah, I mean, I think the developer still has financing in place. They can still move forward on the development as soon as the lawsuit's resolved, but it's just not going to be done that quickly.
It's not endangering this deal, is it? Is anybody sort of getting...
I have not gotten any sense that it would endanger the deal. I think one of the big things that people got excited about in this deal was having a Four Seasons come into the city. That's a really important property to have in a city that has a lot of tourism, that draws a lot of luxury guests that might not otherwise come to New Orleans, or just makes an easier decision to come. So I think that deal, I think Four Seasons would probably like to be here, and the developer wants to do business here.
So for the time being, the challenge still remains in court.
That's right.
We're not sure who's really challenging it right
I mean, it's
now.
possible that we could see this resolved next month, and then you start work pretty soon. If not, if it starts going into appeals and more litigation, then we could see some more slowdown.
Okay, Kevin, thanks a lot. Let's go to Errol right now, and we're going to have a nonstop to London.
Yeah, for years, we've always called our airport an international airport. You could have, some years you could have put an asterisk next to the word international, because there wasn't that much international service. There used to be a lot of international service to Central America, but those lines pretty much combined into one and were taken over by the airlines, and that service went mostly through Houston and Miami. So we weren't the link to Central America that we were. We've had Air Canada service to Toronto, but that's a regional jet. It's not, it's not really big time service, but at least a service. There's been flirtations with Europe. In the 1980s, British Airlines did start a nonstop, And that particular nonstop went from Mexico City to New Orleans, and it was nonstop from New Orleans to London. And the service didn't work. And maybe that was when the economy was turning bad. But what was announced this week is a big deal. This would be 4 times a week service. It's between between Heathrow and New Orleans. It's not going to Mexico City. It goes back and forth. The timing, I think, is wonderful. The flight leaves at 9:40 at night, New Orleans time, and gets in London at noon, London time. And so you could have a full day here, and then get in the plane and just sleep overnight, and you don't want to get there before noon because your hotel room is not going to be ready yet any time, and so noon's the time to be there. And then when it leaves at 3:47 in the afternoon from London, so you can still have a morning in London, have your tea, and so I think it's a good time schedule. The other thing is the plane. The plane is a 787. Which is the newest state-of-the-art plane. It was one of these planes with a lot of composites to be more fuel efficient. It was designed to be a long-range, mid-sized plane with a lot of inputs on comfort. It's a plane that I'm personally anxious to see. It's not flying out of New Orleans now, but it's a very important plane in the airline industry. And so to have a 787 flying back and forth 4 times between New Orleans and London is a good thing. British Airways, I believe, has a code share with Delta, so I can see Delta arranging a lot of connections that you fly into New Orleans and then go to London from there. So I think this is a major moment. And then we also have, in the last year, we have Copa Airlines, which is doing nonstop to Panama City, and again this Condor, which is twice a week to France. To Germany. So we now are legitimately an international airport.
And so this new London flight is going to start in March of next year,
Yeah, it starts
right?
next week, yeah.
All right.
And having a Four Seasons hotel would be wonderful. Those people from London, they fly in and go to the Four Seasons, so that would be nice.
Or many other places in the town, too. Okay, Errol, thanks a lot. All right, time to look ahead.
Well, just as the airport is be taking travelers to London, Gretna is going to be taking people to Natchez. This French-American line is opening service. It's a riverboat service. Its home port is Gretna. It has a newly restored riverboat, and Port Gretna then is going to be starting next week. The first cruise back and forth.
Okay, sounds like fun. Jeremy.
October 25th, early voting starts. It's the beginning of the ground game for all the campaigns. And if you vote this year, you get a special Blue Dog sticker from of course, the late artist George Rodriguez painted. I'm going to get 7 or 8 of them, depending on how many times I can vote.
Okay, we'll see them on your lapel when you next come.
The Trump people.
Yeah, right.
Well, we're all focused on this year's election, the presidential, the Senate, but at City Hall, people are already starting to think about next year, the election, the mayor and the council race coming up. Even with the short-term rental debate, Jared Brissett's the only council member to vote against it. That sets off some chatter about what his plans are. We have budget hearings coming up, so watch it all closely, and you start getting some indications right here at the end of the year.
Never a dull moment at New Orleans
right.
City Hall. Stephanie?
Polls are showing the Senate race still in some flux, presidential race not. That same poll that determined who could participate in the Senate race found that Trump is still 20 points ahead in Louisiana. So you're seeing new states that are in play around the country. This is not one of them.
Okay. Are we going to start seeing more TV for the Senate candidates, do you think? Or
Yeah, definitely.
Because we really haven't seen that terribly much yet, so you really see a lot more starting.
Yeah, they're putting money in these last 2 weeks,
Yeah.
that's for sure.
Okay, your favorite time of year.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.